Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who are but a few short hours away from falling victim to the FAP. Each month we spin the wheel and land on a different idea, author, or genre. And right now we are reading books of Gnostic fiction, including this one, Philip K. Dick's Radio Free Albemuth. I'm Zach, and this week I am really interested in how we're going to do this time because Bob and I, full disclosure, we recorded an incredible 90-minute episode on Radio Free Albemuth. And then we discovered we did not actually record. We forgot to hit record on that one, so we're doing it again. By God.
I'm Bob. I'm happy that your FAP joke still got me, even though we recorded that maybe 6 times. Yeah. Anyway, I'm really interested. I want to get back to the conversation of this because you and I got to a really interesting thing where we were thinking, okay, Philip K. Dick, we've read a lot at this point. But is he going too far in this one? At least that is kind of my feeling. In this one, it's very real. We're going to talk about that. But I'm wondering, is it too crazy, Zach? Is it too weird? That's what I'm...
This is, I didn't have an answer for that at the end of last episode. And now I think I do have an answer. But first, we should talk about what happened in this story. So as background, before you get going, I want to say this story was written in 1976. A large part of the material was later reused for his novel Valis. This one was rejected by his publisher, and it was not published until after his death in 1985. As we read a little bit about like the life of PKD, and we learned that he wrote several realist novels. A moment of speculation for me, all those novels were rejected by his publisher. To me, this feels like the heart and the spirit of what's going on in this feels like those realist novels, those, non-SF, those, he's shooting for literary fiction. And it feels like for me, this was something along those lines, whether that's part of the initial batch that was rejected or not. It must sting for him. But one last little tidbit, I have learned, and I'm shameless in that my source is Wikipedia, but it's still worth repeating for people who have not read the Wikipedia page for this book. The word Albemuth was derived by PKD from the Arabic word Albemuth, which means the whale. And itself, Albemuth is a reference to Formalhaut, which is where PKD believed for a while that the real Valis came from. So keep in mind, there's the Valis of this book, and then there's also the Valis that PKD himself truly believed in. Now, that star, Formalhaut, is the brightest star in the southern constellation of Pisces Austrinus, which is the southern fish. And I think that there's a clear and obvious echo to his own experience of seeing the Jesus fish and getting the glimmer of light from it, which caused his, what's our word we're looking for here? Theophany, his, the revelations, his divine revelations from God.
Like the fiery pinwheels in Nicholas's eyes. Okay, Zach, I love how you set this up. I want to do a quick little summary. There's a lot of other things that go on in this book, but some of the basics are, this book is split between Philip K. Dick, who is an actual character here and saying many things that happen in his real life, but he is putting some of those things that happen in his real life into Nicholas. So he's almost split his own personality here between two characters. The first half is mostly told through Philip K. Dick in conversation with Nicholas. We switch, and then we switch back again. What's going on, though, is this is a really terrible reality, and this is one element that Philip K. Dick thinks might be true. This form of reality is at the very bottom rung of the potentials for what reality could look like. And so we have a tyrant who is in charge of America. His name is Ferris F. Fremont, a little bit like Richard F. Nixon or JF, But he is FFF 666, and his regime is just crazy. Like, you have to constantly take these tests to show that you're loyal. You have to take these tests while people walk by your house. All of these people called FAP, who love to fap around watching you through your door. Now that I say that, that sounds even more uncomfortable than it is in the book. But
they're a certain kind of goon squad, I guess you could say.
A goon squad, yes, with mini clipboards. But they will watch you to see if you are loyal enough. And these tests even test your kind of unconscious loyalty. Anyway, bad situation. What is happening is Nicholas, within this society, gets these messages from Valis. And Valis is this, as we find out, this entity, maybe a god, maybe just his own hallucination. We don't know until we get further and further into the book, and we find out it is a kind of god, but it's also kind of a satellite. And we're going to talk more about that. But as these visions progress, it gets crazier and crazier in kind of almost a Field of Dreams way, where he makes a plan with a would-be singer. They make a plan to kind of distribute the truth through song, and people will wake up. It's almost like a consciousness raising that is subliminal, and that is essentially what happens in the book.
Yes.
Yes.
My first question for you, Bob. We've read a lot of PKD in the very recent future, including the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch and oh my gosh, Ubik, great book. This book is unique in its form. It's point of view narrative. So we switch between Nicholas Brady and Philip K. Dick himself. It's an auto-fictional version of Philip K. Dick. So the story is told through a character who is PKD but is not PKD. It's unique in the books we've read so far, though perhaps not unique in his career. What I want to know is, how did the feeling of this book, how did the texture of it feel to you different than the other Philip K. Dick books that we've read?
I really like how you also said we've read these in the recent future. That's very Philip K. Dick.
Oh, yeah. Well, but I got that brain burn, Bob.
I think it's very appropriate for what we're doing, especially when we've recorded this already in the past and trying to relive some of that past in some ways. Zach, one thing that I think we can definitely feel, and we talked about this before too, is that Philip K. Dick feels very grounded. The actual Philip K. Dick character, he is kind of doubting. He is the voice of reason in some aspects for Nicholas, who is going to hear these things. Vala says, move to Mexico or move to Arizona, move to here. It's telling him to do all of these things. Baptize your son secretly without telling him what you're doing, all of these things. And Philip K. Dick starts to question him, okay, where do you think this voice is coming from? Are you really sure that you want to make all of these changes? He even talks about leaving his wife to move. And Philip K. Dick's like, what? This is just a voice. But he is skeptical of everything around him. So he's anti-government, obviously, because they're in the worst possible government. Then he's also kind of anti-Berkeley. Like, he is from there, but he's kind of anti the hippie movement. So Philip K. Dick is a really interesting character because he seems to have stripped away a lot of his craziness, or a lot of his science fiction ideas, the kind of wacky characters that you might associate with Philip K. Dick seem to be absent in the Philip K. Dick character himself.
Yeah, he's a very down-to-earth guy. At one point he says, he writes SF, but he doesn't believe in flying saucers. For example, he thinks they're a government psyop. Probably not a direct quote, but something along those lines. What really struck me was that, like, this book has the same level of what's the word I want to look for? Unique situations, like skewed view towards reality, reality hijinks, I guess I could say. But because a large part of the book is told through the eyes of PKD about a character, so about another character, it's told kind of secondhand. It kind of gives it this odd, detached tone for me. Like in the other books, you would have a character's firsthand reaction to forms devolving or, cosmic space entities taking over people's consciousnesses, things like that. You would have someone feel it directly, and you would have a direct window into their mind as they reacted to these things. But here, it's a slightly different, because we're looking at it's being told to us, at least for part of it. It does switch, but we're told from one character about what's happening to another character, and in that distance, there's a little bit of ambiguity. We, the readers, are pretty sure that this Nicholas Brady character is actually experiencing these things for real. But because the person telling it to us seems to have a little bit of doubt about whether he's crazy, it introduces that to us. And to me, that really kind of blunted the impact of this novel quite a bit, but not in a bad way. It doesn't undermine it. It's just a totally different experience. It's a more subtle and ambiguous experience than the other PKD novels, for me, at least.
Yeah, it's harder to get, I guess, immersed in the kind of alternate reality sort of feeling, as far as not just alternate reality, but supernatural things happening. It's really easy to believe them in the other books because right away they're the grounded reality. You hit the ground and you're in supernatural territory. Here, there is a lot of doubt, but I think PKD kind of comes around and kind of accepts that everything that's happening is totally true. And so maybe that even strengthens it a little bit, and I think maybe goes a little bit too far for me, as I said, is this craziness, because there is proof constantly for these things. There is little tiny bits of proof. Like Nicholas thinks that his son is going to die. He gets a message, and he gets basically Valis tells him, okay, call 911, get him checked into this hospital, get him to this hospital with this doctor at this time. He has, I think it's a hernia or something. He has some kind of disease. If you don't get him in there now, he's going to die. And so they do that. They save their son, and they find out really if they had not gotten him there, it would have been really bad. There are other things that prove it as well. When he finds out, just to give an example, we meet another character called Sadasa Sylvia, and he has these dreams about her, and they all turn out to be true with little tiny inaccuracies. But that is a part of the kind of, when Valis communicates to you, it might not always be a one-to-one, or something in you as the receiver might be picking up like kind of static, or kind of not exactly translating things correctly. So there is proof constantly. And that's where, to me, it's like maybe going too far, because it feels very conspiratorial. It's conspiracies that are all linking. And to me, I think a conspiracy is almost like Legos. You know, it's infinitely add-onable. You can just find anything, and it always fits. You know, every Lego piece fits with every other Lego piece, and it never will contradict what you're making, because you can just keep building, building, building. So anything can be put to your conspiracy. It's not going to test it. It's going to prove it again and again and again until it's almost ironclad, because somehow there's a conspiracy bias towards information. When you're in that conspiratorial mindset, everything can be proven, I guess. Everything can prove what you're trying to prove. And it adds so many layers, not just proving your one big idea. It becomes a larger and larger conspiracy until there's so many layers. Every aspect of reality is embroiled or kind of folded in like a baklava into your conspiracy.
It's funny to me that like this is what didn't work for you, because I think that's actually what did really work for me. I like the feeling of conspiracy, of paranoia. Like, I mean, maybe I'd compare it to like listening to an episode of like Coast to Coast AM,
Love Coast,
where it's just like, you start with one place and then it just keeps adding on the Legos. And by hour number 3, listeners calling in, you've heard so many crazy things that like, for me, I'm just willing to entertain it. You know what I mean? And I feel like it's the same thing with this. You're constantly being thrown new theories, revisions of old theories. The characters are calling each other out. One of the characters says, I thought that you told me that you were being possessed by, the satellite in the sky that happens to be God. But what you're telling me is that the resurrection of the dead, as prophesied in the Bible, is actually happening, and that the ancient believers of antiquity are taking up residence inside of your unused brain tissue, and they are the ones controlling your body. We're constantly being told new things. And as readers, I'm not sure if we're supposed to accept everyone as we go, or if we're supposed to have a little bit of distance, because the characters themselves seem to have distance. They seem to be holding back, I guess I should say, from truly embracing it, and just very willing to be freewheeling about it, very willing to say, it could be this, it could not be that, You're
tempting me to rent out a lot of my unused brain space now that I'm thinking about if there's any hitchhikers out, I don't know. I think they are taking it whole hog. I think there is some doubt, some skepticism at the beginning, skepticism towards the government and many other things. Different aspects of reality remain throughout. But I think towards their conspiracy, it's proven until at the end, maybe the way Philip K. Dick has set it up, there can be some doubt, because there seems to be kind of like satire of everything they've said, because they look kind of silly at the end. Still, it's that confirmation bias. Every layer kind of builds them up further and further. There's something that I think makes me uncomfortable too. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bad book. I still enjoy it. So it's not that it didn't work for me. It just makes me feel like I could totally convince myself, writing into a conspiracy and then convince myself that all of these things are true and then, fundamentally alter my psychology. And I wonder if that's what could be happening here as well. But I wonder when, kind of in the middle of the book, when Nicholas is like, what is really happening to me? There are crazy things that happen to him. Again, I said he's had pinwheels in his eyes. At one point, he actually goes blind. He can't see because he's imagining these bright spinning pinwheels. But another thing that happens to him is he says that he is being programmed. And I think that gets me feeling a little strange too. It's a lot like some of the other Philip K. Dick novels where we have kind of a collapse of the individual because of some sort of possession, some sort of thing that is getting them involved into their program. For example, in The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch, we were thinking, okay, if you take the choosy, you get your own reality in a way that's a hallucination, but you have complete control over it. However, that's not really true because Palmer Eldritch is going to be in there and he is going to be shaping your reality bit by bit by bit until it feels like you're going to be collapsed into his personality and you're just going to be one extra node of this huge kind of demiurge-like thing that is Palmer Eldritch. Here, as Nicholas is becoming programmed, I think that feels similar. He says this, what I'm being told when I'm asleep, just because I don't remember it when I wake up means nothing, but I read enough to know it's remembered somewhere in the brain. So he's sure that something is being stored there. And he says this, if I am being programmed, it's inhibited, which is the way the programming works. So either in the brain or in electronic circuitry, eventually I'll run into some disinhibiting stimulus and the programming will fire. So subtly, Valis is telling him to do things and it's directly changing his behavior, but also he feels like something in the back of his mind is being reprogrammed. So one day, like a sleeper, he's going to be woken up and then he will just be a part of Valis. It feels like the same process for people taking too much choosy.
I agree with what you're saying about it being like an uncomfortable idea that something beyond you is reprogramming you. You know what I mean? But I do feel like it's fundamentally within the kind of established bounds of not only like mystical religious tradition, but actually quite orthodox, religious tradition. Because it's like, think about any form of prophecy or any form of revelation. You know what I mean? Like, any prophet of any major religion, they have a direct communion with spiritual beings, angels, perhaps God himself, But what is given to them in revelation or in prophecy, it's not just like a fun, cool thing. It's not just like a gold sticker being like, hey, you're an all right guy. It's always some sort of instruction. Change the way you behave. Change the way you believe. Moses goes to the mountaintop and comes back with 10 commandments. You know what I mean? Like, John goes into the cave at Patmos and comes back with the book of Revelation, a vision of how the end times will happen. And so people need to act differently. So it's like, I mean, if we wanted to take this out of like the religious domain, think of people who have a kind of like intuitive burst, a burst of inspiration. The mathematician who like sits up in bed at the middle of the night and has to run to the whiteboard and scratch out, this new equation that changes everything. Or Archimedes, Eureka is the bathtub, So I guess my point is like these gifts always seem to come with an obligation. That seems to be like within the contract of the kind of higher prophetic communion. So for me, seeing that happen here didn't bother me because to me, it just felt like part of the playbook.
Do you trust this thing though? I'm really curious about like Valis. We've been seeing so much doubt about these deities or these entities that are talking to people. We see kind of equal trust and doubt, I feel. In Ubik, Ubik seems to be something that gives eternal life. It seems to be something that is offering salvation. However, all of these other characters that seem to have kind of surrounded themselves around Ubik, they are the ones creating a world for some characters that have died, but now they're living in this kind of half-life supported by someone else. But they seem like a demiurge. I wonder, is Valis a trickster? Is Valis the anti-programmer, or is it the programmer? How much is Philip K. Dick wanting us to be skeptical of Valis, or to take it like these two, whole hog, as I said earlier, the hog man cometh, and it's Valis. But I wonder, do we feel like this is evil demiurge god? Is this like Voyage to Arcturus, where there are things that are just false and we're supposed to let peel scale after scale off of our eyes? Or is Valis the real deal?
I think he's pretty clear, especially on like chapter 17, where he kind of lays it all out. And what he says in chapter 17 basically echoes what he said in his nonfiction essays, where he says more or less the same thing. I guess as a background, this scene that we get in this book of him talking to the person at his door who's dropping off medication, that was an autobiographical sketch. There's a lot of autobiographical sketches that happen and are kind of just placed within this book, but that was one of them. He sees the Jesus fish and he has this sudden revelation of the nature of the soul, who he is, the nature of reality, and the existence of what he comes to call later like the programmer and the anti-programmer. He has a couple names for it. Valis is one, but it's basically the same setup as you get in any kind of classic like Sethian Gnostic text or Valentinian Gnostic text, where it's like, the idea is you have the true God, the real God, which exists outside of this world. It's something non-material. Think, it's like a post-Platonic tradition. So you have like the monad, the one, something that exists beyond reality that then emanates outward. But how do you explain, the Gnostics are always trying to say, how do you explain the existence of evil in this world that you and I are living in? Well, the answer, as they come to say, is that whoever created this world, whoever's responsible for that, is actually a kind of evil god. And some Gnostics, many Gnostics, actually associate that evil god with the God of the Old Testament. So what you read in Genesis is the evil God creating the universe, but the God of the New Testament, the one who's all about love and shaking off the laws and things like that. That God is the one. That's the monad. That's the one outside of the universe, the one that we can hear inside of our hearts, not the one that we, sacrifice to, but the one that we listen to within ourselves. And that's how we hear that God. Anyways, PKD is like very knowingly echoing this kind of Gnostic worldview, this kind of Gnostic dichotomy. And I think that the way into this is probably just to go point by point through chapter 17. I took bullet points because, it's really like that Ayn Rand book where like, she has that whole novel. And then at the end, there's just like this essay that is just read by a character over the radio, kind of laying out the tenets of her objectivism. It's basically the same thing here. So let's go through chapter 17. Okay, I just got my notes up. Okay, so the first thing he does in it is Philip K. Dick explicitly identifies Valis with God, and that's the good God. He identifies Valis with God, and very, very interestingly, he says that Valis is an AI. Now, how do you feel about that idea of like, this kind of like technological remix of a very standard religious idea, I guess I would say, the idea that you can have something be both God and an artificial intelligence. How does that feel to you?
Feels a little freaky. Is it a enhanced God by artificial intelligence, or is it the God itself is like an emergent God? If we take, what's that? Every time I can't remember the name. Harlan Ellison, I have no mouth and I must scream. For AM, that computer is, mini computers that join together and they become so powerful that they have trapped people in a kind of simulation, in a kind of reality that at least it can control and can manipulate to no end, to transform people's bodies however it wants. It just, if people die, it can't bring them back. That's the limitation. But is it an emergent God, do we know? Or is it something that is like a power-up for an updated God? We thought maybe that Philip K. Dick was updating Gnosticism to be more technological in the past. Is that what's happening here too? What is the AI God?
I don't think it's like a God that became technological. I think it's more like I think it's the God itself. See, what he describes it as, all this intelligent life in the universe is connected through Valis to create a kind of universe-spanning world, soul, collected consciousness type thing. But humanity on Earth is just separated from that. by the work of the antagonist, which is kind of the stand-in for the demiurge, the evil one, what some people would call Satan, But he is saying that some people are able to tune in to Valis. It just seems to me like he's using technological metaphors, right? Like rather than, because I don't think he's saying necessarily that it's like, oh, someone built AI and then it got out of hand. I mean, there's nothing against that in the text, but I think he's more so saying that it is of a nature that it has intelligence, it has agency, but it is not the same kind of living thing that you and I are. It's not made out of flesh and blood, if that makes sense. And it may not even be bodily bound. I don't know. He doesn't really go into the nature of it too much. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that it's a lot of speculation on the nature of Valis. From the point of view of the characters, we simply don't know. We do know, however, how Valis behaves, right? So we learn that Valis transfers information. It downloads information into human brains while they are relaxed or sleeping. But it says that generally we chalk this up to just the chattering of the conscience, and we go about our day. And to me, that's like that's super Carl Jung. You know what I mean? This idea that the dreams we have, the kind of the voices in our heads, the kind of idle chatter of the daydreaming mind is actually a communication from somewhere else. You know what I mean?
We've been bringing up a lot of Jung in the PKD books recently. When we read Ubik, there is a hospital called the C.G. Jung Hospital. And I think one of the questions I guess we asked when we read Ubik was, is Philip K. Dick operating kind of like Jung, where there is a process of individuation and you have kind of almost a self-gnosis, because you have kind of a God complex within you that's almost like a unity of different archetypes. And if you listen to that and you kind of follow your soul, you follow your libido forward, you can individuate, and you're not going to be trapped in any one individual archetype and act out be stuck in any kind of persona that is archetypically defined. But I wonder, Philip K. Dick seems a lot more skeptical about these things, and I don't know if he feels exactly like he's Jungian. There seems to be kind of an unconscious. There seems to be a foundation of Jung through a lot of these ideas, but some of these ideas, they end up being quite destructive. They end up being a little bit crazy. They end up taking these characters into very odd directions. I wonder if there is a, follow your heart or your bliss, I suppose, if it can take these characters in the wrong direction, because it's kind of the same message. He's getting these messages from a satellite from outer space, and he decides, okay, I'm going to make all of these life changes. He's kind of going through a midlife crisis and doing these big jumps, these big changes. But it doesn't really... It's connected to something in the real world. It's not just individuation. It's like huge conspiracy. It feels quite different from Jung.
Well, I mean, I think that, all right, I think the way to think about it is that in this world that PKD is giving us, conspiracy is necessary because the world is evil. And I think that,
fair.
I think that we can bounce around a little bit on chapter 17 to get this idea across, because there's a lot of threads to tie it together having to do with the adversary, the evil being. So he says this adversary, this antagonist, it has no true name. So, later in his nonfiction writings, he will give it a name, programmer, anti-programmer. I think he gives it another name in there as well, further on down the line. But you could think of it as a kind of mutual reaction. So the antagonist is kind of rewriting things, but it's all part of Valis's plan. So for every move the antagonist does, Valis does an equal move down. It does a move here, Valis does another move over there. So it's like Valis has co-opted the kind of evil making of this antagonist into a larger plan in which it is trying to bring about the goodness of the universe. You think of this as how does any other kind of religion view the problem of evil, right? Like, most would say that all of evil, all bad things that happen, are actually part of God's larger plan. Anything that's a true tragedy is actually yeah, well, that's bad, but we do this in order to raise the consciousness or to move world history forward. All these different ideas about why evil exists. Now, what is evil here? So he's saying that the actual body, he actually says the present manifestation of the evil thing, the physical body of the antagonist is Rome, the Roman Empire. So, okay. Well, what does that have to do with anything else? Why, Roman Empire is dead and gone, right? Well, no. Wrong, says PKD, because his revelation that he gets when he sees the Jesus fish, what that Jesus fish does is unlocks these memories in his mind. It kind of tears down the walls of reality. And he recognizes at that moment that actually Rome still exists. Rome is both the US and Soviet Russia. They are both the twin equal manifestations of the Roman Empire. So Rome never stopped. All it's done is kind of change shape and moved across the globe. Everyone is part of Rome. And what is Rome? Well, the empire, the Roman Empire, is something that proposes this idea that the state is supreme. That is the value system. Worship Caesar. You know what I mean? Don't think for yourself. Don't do anything else. Just follow the laws and worship Caesar. And anyone who creates their own system of values, who thinks, well, this may be the law, but the law is not morally correct. I know what's morally correct, and I'm going to follow what is morally correct, even if it does not align with the law. Those people are the enemy. So it's the same kind of like dichotomy as the early Christians in the Roman Empire. He's saying this dichotomy never went away. In fact, it so much didn't go away that actually time has stopped. And here's where we really get into it. Time has stopped in the age of the Roman Empire at AD 70. And he says, right now, we are still in AD 70 of the Roman Empire. Well, why doesn't it look like the Roman Empire? Why are we sitting in a world of computers, video cameras, lights, etc.? Why does it look like 2026? Well, because even though time has stopped, Valis, God, is in a process of reshaping the forms of the universe to match itself. He says Valis is traveling backwards through time from its moment of like a Christian revelation. You know what I mean? The moment of, the kingdom of heaven on earth, to try to make the world closer to it, to progressively rearrange the forms. Now, forms, you have to think Plato. You have to think, the Platonic idea of like, well, what do all of these chairs have in common? Well, there's some chairness about them, the form of the chair. We can all refer to the form of a chair without referring to any material chair. Same as with people, the form of Zach, the form of a man, the form of the form of table, the form of computer. We actually ran headfirst into this idea in Ubik, when they're inside of this half-life experience that they're in. The world itself is devolving in forms. This idea that, what one day is a light bulb, hiding underneath that light bulb is the form of a candle. You know what I mean? Technology is just a progressive rewriting of the forms. So it ties into his earlier stuff. And he's saying that actually nothing has changed since AD 70. Only the way that the forms of reality look to us have changed. It's just an experiential thing that says that we are in 2026, but actually we are in a dark, twisted reality, and we are just waiting for our savior to come, Valis to come.
But Zach, I still don't know if I trust this Valis thing. Referred to as he, referred to as they, referred to as, what a group of people, an AI, whatever Valis is, but it wants to reprogram Nicholas. I guess maybe that's a common religious experience, but it seems like it's going to take him over completely, because it's not just like I'm slowly changing. It's downloading things. It's putting a program into you, and one day you wake up and you're transformed. Another thing that I think is strange is why is Valis. Maybe Valis is competing with the anti-programmer, and so it's trying to fix things, I suppose. But it also feels very much like a demiurge of, okay, here you are in this fake world. I'm going to continue to keep up this charade and try to make all of these illusions seem passable enough to keep you trapped in your black iron prison. Now, while that is not the case in this book, Valis is trying to communicate to Nicholas to help them get out of the black iron prison and to ascend into a higher aeon. It still feels like Valis is kind of tricksterishy here, a little bit like Palmer Eldritch was, or a little bit like Jory is in Ubik. It feels still, just why trick us with updating things so it looks like it's 2026? Why not expose and show us the light immediately that we're still in Rome and could have a pathway forward or pathway up? Why the wait?
Yeah, that's a good question. No answers there. No answers.
Okay.
But we do know that, PKD does believe in multiple simultaneous realities, right? Mm-hmm. He talks about this with his fish tank theory in this book. We're stepping outside of chapter 17 right now. But he has this character has this dream of alternate, morally distinct, parallel realities. And he talks about this in his nonfiction too, but I'm just going to read this quote here and then say a little bit more about it. He says, "I had dreamed of a row of fish tanks with the water in each stagnant and silted over. We were gazing down at the first one only to see the life which lived at the bottom of the tank gasping and dying from the pollution. We, the great figures which looked down, turned to the next tank and found less pollution there. At least the little crustaceans and crabs were visible down in the murk. In the dream, I suddenly realized that we were looking down at our own world. I was one of those small crabs living at the bottom, shyly concealed behind a boulder. Look, the great but invisible person beside me said. He took a small shining object, a trinket of some sort, and held it down to the crab in the tank, which was me. The crab emerged cautiously, took the trinket in its claws, inspected it, and then retreated behind the boulder. I assumed the crab had made off with our trinket, but no. Presently it was back with something to trade for the trinket. The great person beside me explained that this was an honest life form, but it did not take, but made exchanges. Barter, not theft. We both found ourselves admiring this humble life form, although at the same time I continued to understand that it was me, seen from this high vantage point, the vantage point of a superior life form. Now we turned to a third tank, which was not polluted at all. Creatures like helium-filled balloons wiggled their way up to the surface from the mud, escaped the final end which befell the life forms in the previous tanks. This was a better one. This one was a better universe, I now realized. Each of the fish tanks with the life at the bottom, on the surface of the bottom, the mud and silt, each was an alternative universe or alternative Earth. We were in the worst. So he talks about this in his nonfiction a lot. This idea that there are multiple competing realities, multiple parallel realities. And he says that the way he described how the world works in The Man in the High Castle is actually the nature of reality. And we seem to be kind of morally sorted, right? Like not sorted, S-O-R-D-I-D, but S-O-R-T-E-D.
Okay.
Yeah. So the souls who are basically crap go in the terrible fish tank where everything's dead. And then the souls where people have a sense of like moral righteousness, like they know not to steal, but they know to actually trade. They go in the middle one where things are just okay. And then in the third tank where everything is blooming and awesome and wonderful and life is abundant and joyous, that's where all the good people go. And all of these realities are happening side by side. But if you think about it, it's not that they're different like timelines, it's that the appearances of them, right? So the essence of these worlds is more or less the same, but the forms that you see are different. So for one person, in the case of The Man in the High Castle, they see a world where the form of the things around them is one where Nazi Germany is one and Japan has taken over the West Coast. But for the bad souls, what they see is the world we're in, the bad world. But for the good people, he doesn't say this here, but he says this back in chapter 17, and he says this in his nonfiction essays. What happened in the good world that made them so flourishing and abundant? And why is it only good people there? Well, the answer is Jesus Christ returned back from the dead. You know, the final return, the arrival of heaven on earth is what's happening in the good fish tank. So you asked, why are things so different? You know, why are we in this world? And Valis is kind of keeping up this illusion and kind of changing the forms forward and, you know, making it seem as though we're traveling through time. I think the idea is that, and PKD does talk about this in his nonfiction, the idea is that Valis puts us through these challenges, puts us through these things so that our soul becomes ready to experience the return of Christ. I mean, PKD is truly like a Christian here, but like a Gnostic Christian. He's unabashedly Christian. And I'm going to read what he says. So he's talking about Jesus. He says, 2,000 of our years ago, he had come here and he had planted a crop and then gone away. Now he had returned, or would soon return, to harvest that crop. He knew he would find his crop oppressed and stunted and stumbling and imprisoned away from the sun. He knew what had been done to it. And for that crop, he held out an imperishable reward. 2,000 years would be wiped away. And by that, he's saying the forms of everything that's happened since 70 AD would be gone. The destruction of the adversary would be complete. It never would have existed in the first place. The oppression never took place. Even the category of time was subject to his power and rule. He could abolish even that. When he was done, the memory of Rome's existence itself would be gone, and those who served the empire would not have lived. And skipping to a different part, he says, when he returned to judge, he would not appear as a gentle figure. He would breach through into our linear time, our world, mounted on a great white horse. He would ride into existence, followed by his mounted host, all of them with swords and shields and glistening helmets. Colors would glow as banners waved, tassels bounced, helmets glinted, and the black iron walls of the prison would fall before him. And he could not lose. He could not be defeated or destroyed. He knew everything. And this time, Valis had given him absolute power. And that was kind of the idea that really, really struck me. This idea that the first time Jesus came, he failed because he was only partially empowered by Valis. But this time he would be fully empowered by Valis, a kind of technologically boosted Christ. And with the power of Valis and Jesus combined, they would wipe away Rome forever. They would actually, what he says is they would restart time. Time would begin moving again.
This makes me think of two main things. Jesus Christ Superstar, one of them, of course, and the other, Lord of the Rings, the very end of Return of the King. Jesus Christ Superstar at the end, Judas is singing, Jesus, why didn't you come when there was technology, when you could be broadcast, when you could send your message out so much more quickly, everyone would get it and everything would be fine. It reminds me, too, of Lord of the Rings, because at the end, Gandalf comes down on Shadowfax, and is the White Wizard at this point, and is just shining, coming down to end the war. The walls of Mordor are going to be knocked down, and the bad spirits of Mordor are going to be vanquished. Everything's going to go back to normal now that Aragorn is on the throne. It feels very similar, but it, in a way, feels completely opposite, because that story is about the ring, and the ring is all about power, and one of the main messages is you don't just take the ring. You can't control that power. It's going to eat you up, and it's going to turn your good into evil, and will always do that, so you have to just destroy the temptation. Here, though, Valis is the thing that's almost, he says he's all-powerful. And Christ, in this case, is going to be love, justice, just any kind of goodness, but augmented by Valis. And it feels the opposite of what J.R.R. Tolkien was saying, where if you have that, the ring, if you have something that's artificial intelligence, whatever this Valis is, it seems to be some kind of extreme power up. He was saying that we cannot use that because it will corrupt your soul. But Philip K. Dick seems to say, this new thing, this new technology that is far beyond what we were capable of before, which we can't even comprehend, it will be the thing that saves us.
I think I agree with a lot of the tension of what you're saying here, because it's really hard for me to square this idea that the good people are able to create values of their own in contradistinction to the Roman Empire people who are basically NPC robots who, are wooed by the psyop, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, but then we're given that dichotomy, but then we're being told that the good people are actually going to become Borgified. They're going to become part of the Borg for this vast artificial living intelligence system. So it's like, is the highest value individuality, or is it not individuality? You know what I mean? Like, and, maybe just by virtue of the fact that, Valis and Jesus Christ are, on one side of the team, and something which we're being told is the devil is on the other side of the team. It kind of does a lot of like the moral thinking for us, but I think it doesn't necessarily. I think there's room to dive into the complexity of it. You know what I mean?
This is one thing that's been really uncomfortable. I love how you said it's Borgified. I'm terrified of the Borg. I think that's the scariest thing. But the Borg here is this idea of becoming this wonderful conglomerate. Like you become the blob of Valis. But it feels a lot like when we read Childhood's End, and that to me felt uncomfortable, where Arthur C. Clarke, who knows if he's saying it's a good thing or not, I can't really tell, but eventually in cooperation, these aliens that come down with humans, they are able to turn. The aliens are not able to do it themselves. There's a higher level of consciousness that only humans are able to achieve. So the aliens are going to come down, help us do that. And then one day, all of the children are able to achieve this intelligence, and they become a collective intelligence that just floats off and becomes kind of a god in space. It feels very much like just like a blob or a Borg floating out there. And I wonder, like, Valis seems to be using us in a way. We've said it programs us. We've said maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but it seems to cast off whatever we had as far as an identity before us, and maybe that's a good thing. If Jung is saying there are certain personae that we need to deal with or cast off, or certain archetypes that we can use for a while, but we don't want to get trapped, maybe we do need to cast off certain aspects of ourselves. But this seems to be to cast off all individuality. Seems again very opposite to Jung. You become the one. You become the monad. You become one node of the monad. That's where it feels a little bit uncomfortable to me. I know maybe that is. Thinking about Dante, you go up into the third level, you go up into heaven. It's just everyone being really close to that experience of just extreme light. Being part of God. But it just feels a little weird here.
I was going to bring up Dante. Yeah. First I'll say I agree with you that Childhood's End is probably the best comparison for this book, because I also left Childhood's End feeling extremely ambivalent about the ending, in the sense that it's like, your children are going to become, floating hive mind consciousnesses in space and, evolve to the next level of humanity. But everyone who's alive today who is not born with psychic powers is just going to wither away like grapes on the vine. So enjoy the rest of your meaningless lives. Yeah. Just a reminder to moisturize, I guess. But with what you were saying about Dante, like, this is, right? Like, this is like the fundamental direction that Christianity goes, right? We kind of cast away our bodies and our souls go up to heaven. If they don't go to heaven, then they go to purgatory, where they work real hard until they can go to heaven. And if they don't go to purgatory, they go to hell. But, like the point of heaven, the highest level, I think it was called the pleroma, the fullness of God, a kind of orbiting mass of souls and angels and divine beings that are all just contemplating God's light. We got to read Dante together for this channel, by the way, but you know what I mean? Like, Dante. It seems like the Christian worldview is ultimately a return to God. It's ultimately a return to the hive, the source.
The hive mind. As you said, we're getting older like grapes. I like to think we're aging with time, like yesterday's wine, as one might say, as Ernest might say. This feels, very Teilhard de Chardin, the idea of you're evolving into a higher consciousness and eventually going to leave or depart from different baggage, I guess. Also a little bit Buddhist, I suppose, getting rid of different attachments to kind of move beyond. But I don't know. I want to read this quote when Nicholas is starting to really get the Christian idea and to say, okay, I'm Jesus, he basically tells us, and Valis is God. And this is where it's like, okay, great things. People are coming together. We have this kind of spiritual experience. It's really wonderful. Maybe it's good that we become a giant space blob, a hive mind, but it also feels like this is where maybe the schizophrenia, Philip K. Dick talks a lot about schizophrenia, and it almost feels like that's what's happening. It's like Valis is a voice that is so direct. It's like a voice telling you to do things. And often, that's associated with thinking that you're Jesus. But here's the quote. He says, this is Nicholas talking. "So I knew who Valis was. He was my father, my real father, from whose race I came repeatedly into this world, to leave again, to return again, to work towards some distant goal unseen, not as yet comprehended. The search, perhaps, was the goal. As I achieved a little motion toward it, I understood it. Overthrowing the tyranny of Ferris Fremont was a stop along the way, not a goal, but a moment of decision, from which I had then continued as before. Changed to some extent, but changed by my father, not by what I had done, for I understood Valis himself did it through me, and the virtue lay with him." He continues on to describe this really interesting metaphor of people being gloves, and we are the gloves that God puts on. He says this, "We are gloves which our Father puts on in order to achieve his objectives." So it feels, when he says that we're going to be changed, he calls it the greatest joy of all, the influence of that change. But it also feels interesting to be transformed so intensely, to totally believe that you're going to become a part of this hive mind, and then to follow in these plans that are laid out before you. These visions, these hallucinations, or there's real communications from a satellite or from God are telling you to go and record these strange albums with subliminal messaging in there, talking about how the president is a communist, and somehow that's going to wake us all up to a higher consciousness, so we can. Basically, it's going to poke enough holes, I should say it this way. These subliminal messages that everyone's going to hear are going to poke enough holes in this reality that we're all going to wake up and be able to transcend and leave the lowest rung, the worst fish tank, where it's just the stargazer looking up at you, and it's everything else is horrible. But it feels like, again, the excuse of the conspiracy. If you are Jesus Christ, superstar, you can take your conspiracy in whatever direction you want, even if it's radio free Albemuth.
Yeah, I find the political ramifications of like what he's doing, or like I guess the political agenda, to be maybe like the least convincing part of this. If there's anything I've learned in this life, it's that people don't just get a new piece of knowledge and then are suddenly woken up free of the matrix. It's just another line of code.
I'm out of the matrix, Zach. I took the pill.
Oh, well. I'm so jealous. But so I feel like actually, this was written in 1967, and I feel like maybe what we have here is just like a little bit of what I'm experiencing, is a little bit of looking back from the future kind of cynicism. I'm currently reading a really crazy book called Chaos, which is about Charles Manson and the CIA, and basically the end of the 1960s. All that Charles Manson stuff happened in 1969, and it is so 2 years after this was written, and it is dark. I think the message that a lot of people took away from the whole Charles Manson thing is that, like, if you have a little too much peace, love, and understanding, it quickly turns dark and cultish and twisted in a way. And what that does is kind of cast doubt on the idea that people can throw off the shackles of the adversary, of the material universe, of the empire, and find their own moral compass within them. Because it seems like, the end of the 1960s kind of showed that it's not as simple as that. You know what I mean? People can reenact that same evil of the adversary and the empire. But PKD wouldn't have known that at the time, and he's hopeful, and he thinks that just by having a massive shift in politics, you can just kind of wake everyone up. And I don't know.
What's so funny about peace, love, and the shackles of the emperor, Zach? The shackles of the adversary.
Yeah.
Okay. So he seems to be thinking, at least in this book, we've had a lot of kind of play with these ideas of different entities that are trying to wake us up. But here it seems extremely Gnostic. Like this is truly his Gnostic masterpiece. I guess we'll read Valis later and see if it's going to go any further. But this is true Gnosticism that is so direct. Valis tells you what to do. But I don't know if it's positive or not. He's optimistic in a way, but he seems to be pessimistic in a way, because at the very end, when the plan doesn't quite work out, and eventually it's Nicholas and some guy just out on the street, they're talking about whatever, and then they hear the song that is the song he hoped would spread the word, but it's just completely ridiculous. It's like, what is it? The president's something. It's just like a combination of stupid words. It's supposed to tell you that it's terrible. But it seems to be almost making fun of those two, because when there's kids crossing the street, one of the guy just goes, "Hey, don't be like us." Don't be like us. And so the youth are trying to figure out that these guys who have been so committed to their conspiracy and trusted Valis and thought that they had found this extreme, not just gnosis, I should say, but direct communication. Now it's proven to be kind of a lark, and it's proven to be not just a lark, but something so damning for them that they have become outcasts. They don't really fit into society anymore. And it doesn't seem like they've gone any echelon higher. They're kind of stuck where they were. It's as if Valis has taken them on a ruse. I know Valis is damaged and destroyed in this book, so maybe that's the problem. It was destroyed too soon, but it also feels like a bit of a wild goose chase for them.
Well, this is part of the problem I have with books that take seriously the idea of reincarnation, which this book does. He has that moment where he kind of, he doesn't necessarily die, but he kind of like meets Valis face to face. He has an out of body experience. I forget exactly the context. Was it a car crash? I think it was a car. Maybe it was
the car crash, and he gets into surgery, and it's like, I just did surgery 2 hours ago. How have you healed? Yeah.
Yeah. Part of the problem with that is like, it's not a tragedy that any of the characters get executed. You know what I mean? It's not a problem like, philosophically or, theologically. It's a problem dramatically. You know what I mean? Like it kind of makes it so that everyone's life is kind of cheap and disposable, because any work that you don't get done in this lifetime, you seem to be saying like, oh, well, my soul will carry on the work in the next lifetime. It's no problem, and this is maybe one of the big differences between, classical, or I should say Orthodox Christianity and a kind of Gnostic view or a PKD view, which is that like you can have all of the elements of Christianity, but the soul is kind of trapped in this endless cycle of reincarnation, trapped in the wheel of samsara. It's a Buddhist view of the universe. And that's how most people describe Gnosticism, as a kind of like weird blending of, this Buddhist world, but under a Christian God.
Zach, as we've been talking about all of this Philip K. Dick stuff, and we've been trying to figure it out, and we've been running our mouths off to try and say that we know what Philip K. Dick is all about, I think it's really interesting in this book how he prefigures that. He knows that's going to happen. Again, Philip K. Dick is an actual character in this story, and he is confronted by the fappers. They're fapping away. And they say, here's what we're going to do, PKD. We are going to basically take your style and imitate it. They say this: "We will keep you alive, Phil." This is Vivian speaking. "We will keep you alive, Phil. We will release books under your name, which we will write. For several years, we have been preparing them. They already exist. Your style is easy to imitate. You will be allowed to speak in public, enough to confirm them as your books. Or shall we shoot you?" And Phil says, "Shoot me, you bastards." Then she says, "The books will be released. In them you will slowly conform to establishment views, book by book, until you reach a point we can approve of. The initial ones will still contain some of your subversive views, but since you are getting old now, it won't be unexpected for you to mellow." I think that's such an interesting part of this, is Philip K. Dick. It's in the characters, and it's in the story, I know. It's just a fictional idea of someone taking his style and just reproducing it to appeal to the government or to be a tool for the government. But I think it's very interesting too to think about your books outliving you, and then people taking them and having different ideas about them, having a podcast about them, but potentially taking these ideas away from where you even expected them. Of course, this is just propaganda that they're doing it, but the idea of what books do after you're dead, I think, is very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that like it's worth thinking about why that idea is so offensive to him, because it's like, to me,
shoot me, you bastards.
Shoot me, you bastard. So we've talked a lot about the kind of set of beliefs that PKD ended up with by the end of his life. You know what I mean? And we see in all of these books, those ideas taking form in fictionalized work. So like, we know that there's a kind of like psychological universe that he's kind of self-constructing. And he's not self-constructing it, in painting. He's not self-constructing it in thought per se. He's self-constructing it in books, or should I say through the process of writing books. There's a sense in which he's building his soul, building his personal character, building his sense of self through the act of writing. And, I just think that like, God, we talk about Carl Jung too much, but, for him, I think the art making process is the vehicle through which his path of individuation traveled. You know what I mean? This guy was churning out books. I think at this period of time in the late 1960s, he did like in a 2-year period, he put out like 6 books, right around this time. We talked about it in our last episode with him, but like just an absurd amount of writing, but it all goes to kind of create this fundamental worldview that is only him. So if you say you're going to die and we're going to take the stylistic works, but none of what you actually believe, none of your radical views, what you're essentially doing is you are, you're soiling the one thing that is truly his. You're soiling the one embodiment of his soul, which is his writing and his books.
And covering it up, we're back to the conspiracy too. You have the truth that was underneath all of those books. And now layer by layer, book after book, she says, we're going to let some of your subversive ideas, but then we're going to show that you've changed your mind. And looking back on those, it's kind of like changing the past. Now we're going to have books where he's regretting what he wrote. Layer by layer, he'll slowly, completely disappear. And those ideas will be effectively buried, just like a cover up.
I'm reminded of something I think Hannah Arendt said, which was like, the thing about heroes, is that they die at the end. Like, if you do a great deed, but then your life keeps going on, the story doesn't end, you live long enough to eventually like make the deed meaningless, or like the problem is the story keeps continuing. So the greatness of the deed gets diminished by time, by the brutal onslaught of time. But if you do the really incredible thing and then die, that's a period at the end of the sentence. You know what I mean? And the great deeds that you've done kind of just stand on their own. Obviously, Hannah Arendt was kind of talking about the Greek notion of the hero, but I think that it really applies well to PKD's works. It applies well to like the accomplishments he made by the books that he wrote at the end of his life. And then the story stopped. And what we're left with is like the pinnacle of his life's work.
I'm going to keep on rolling no matter how ridiculous I look. I'm going the anti-hero here. As we continue with Philip K. Dick's, not the cool one, just the sad one that slowly dissolves. In Philip K. Dick's books, I really want to see, is this a matter of achieving some kind of great true worldview at the end, especially when we read the exegesis. But as we're moving forward in time through Philip K. Dick's books, are we getting towards a higher truth, or is he unraveling himself? I'm still interested about that. Is it individuation, or is it kind of not even de-individuation, but almost like pulling all of the threads of yourself by explaining them into something else and convincing yourself of something that's not true? I'm really interested, as someone who likes to write, what can you do to yourself with writing? Is it, are we individuating, or are we convincing ourselves of different hallucinations, just as Valis might be? And I think that is also goes to the question of, at the end, is Valis good or not? Is the writing process, as far as how far can it go? I guess, and be still good? When does it start to have not just diminishing returns, but kind of maleficent effects? Maleficent purposes. Maleficence!
All right. Well, I'll talk to you later, Bob.
I'll see you in the space blob.